Welcome back to the Tara Palmeri Show. You know something big is happening when lawyers start walking away from million-dollar salaries to defend the rule of law. My guest today, Matthew Wollin, was an attorney at WilmerHale. It is one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. You might recognize its glass-walled offices from the HBO show Succession. So he saw up close how President Trump's attack on the entire legal industry affected his firm before he left to become a journalist. We talk about why so many law firms caved, settling with Trump before he even came after them, and what it says about the state of American institutions when even the lawyers, who are supposed to be the defenders of democracy and the rule of law, are settling with the very man challenging it. We also dive into the quiet rebellion among young associates and law students refusing to work for firms that capitulated, and how a handful of new rule of law startups are emerging in their place, a silver lining, you could say. Matthew wrote about all of this in the New Republic in a piece called "The Lawyers Who Gave Up Big Money to Fight Trump." It's a story that raises a bigger question, though. If the people who are supposed to uphold the law are folding, who's left to fight? And it's not just happening in law. We're seeing it across the board in media, tech, finance, and academia. So let's get into it. My conversation with Matthew Wollin. Matthew, thank you for joining the show. First of all, I want to ask you, what made you decide to come to the dark side of journalism? Leave big law yourself. How do we manage to get you over here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, is journalism the dark side? If it is, I'm still finding out, I guess. But so far, it's been
No.
good.
I mean, we would say in journalism, PR is the dark side, but not
Yeah,
everybody tends to want to go into the journalism business, as it's not quite as lucrative as big law. So that's why I'm curious.
it's true. I mean, I think big law was great. My job was great. I learned a ton. I worked on a lot of amazing things. But I also, I mean, I feel like I'm a writer fundamentally, and I like writing to large
Mm.
audiences. You know, like I find it more interesting to communicate with non-experts, basically, to kind of take what I know and help share it with the world. And I felt like there was both a need and like a place for that in the world these days, particularly with law stuff. You know, there's like
Mm.
legal stuff is very important nowadays. It's very like in the news, obviously, but
Mm.
lawyers are by and large pretty terrible at explaining it and talking to normal people and sounding interesting and doing all of those things because lawyers love their legalese and their jargon and stuff like that. And
Mm.
so I kind of thought there was a place for me there, in part because my career's been very all over the place. I'm pretty good at translating between worlds. And so I kind of started to publish some stuff. It was going well, and then decided to take the jump.
Yeah. Wow. Good for you. And what law firm were you working at?
WilmerHale.
Okay. Wow.
Mhm.
That's a big one. Um,
It is, yeah. It is, yeah. It's one of the big or it's one of the what's called big law firms. I'm sure we'll get into this more, but it's one of
yeah.
this set of like the biggest and kind of most prestigious law firms. There's a big office in New York. The claim to fame for the office is that it was literally the set for Succession.
Mm.
So if you're getting a sense of what the vibe was like at the office, at least visually, it's that like all glass boardroom sort of look.
And how many years did you work there?
About 5 years.
And what college did you go to, or law school?
I went to NYU Law School.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, NYU Law is a really good school. WilmerHale. It's a very intimidating place to work. You know, everybody is incredibly smart. Half
Right.
my bosses had clerked for Supreme Court justices and like other
Mhm.
similarly impressive stuff. And it's one of those environments where being good is just kind of like normal. You know,
Yeah.
you almost start to, or I at least, just out of like selfishness, almost started to hope to encounter someone. Like you keep waiting to encounter someone who's not good at their job so you can just be better than them, and that never happens because never everybody is good at their job.
Right. A lot of
Yeah,
type A people, I'm sure.
very much so. Yes.
Right. So everything sort of changed, though, in February 2025 when Trump put out this initial memo targeting Covington and Burling. How did this set off a chain of events inside of the industry? Were you still working? there?
I was still working there until March.
Mm,
It started, I mean, it was kind of shocking. I mean, both
mm,
shocking and not shocking, knowing Trump, but it was shocking because normally lawyers are kind of off limits, even in like the worst political battles. I think in a lot of ways, lawyers are seen as and see themselves as kind of neutral people, basically, who will represent either side. Like they kind of hold access to the law, but they are usually not the targets. And so when Trump went after the lawyers themselves, the law firms, it was just from my standpoint as like a lawyer and someone who learns in law school, what the law is supposed to represent, it was kind of shocking. And it was like, who's going to be next? And certainly I worked at WilmerHale, which again, great place to work. It is like pretty widely known as like a very progressive, generally democratic leaning firm. And so it certainly felt like it was only a matter of time before his gaze moved towards where I was working. And so there
yeah.
was definitely an increased awareness of that being on the horizon for sure.
There is this sort of paradox, though, like you said, that you did work for a progressive Democratic firm, but yet the law is seen as not political. I remember when I was a kid, my mom worked at Cory Booker's law firm, and it was very much felt like I mean, what she was doing wasn't political work, but law tends to be political. So it's hard to sort of divorce the two. Not to say that that should be a reason to be targeted, but it's hard to play the game of like neutral arbiter when so many of the law firms do seem to have one, like Jones Day is very conservative, and you see various people that work from the Trump administration coming from there. So how do you sort of make the argument that there are neutral arbiters while working at these law firms that tend to take on cases that reflect their own views?
Yeah, I mean, you cut to the heart of the issue, like almost immediately right there, particularly the heart of the issue when it comes to big law firms in particular, in that they are this kind of a paradox of the modern workplace, where there is
Mm,
this kind of democratic lawyerly ideal that all lawyers learn in law school, where like they're integral to the proper functioning of American democracy. They ensure the court systems work right, the kind of adversarial in courts back and forth is how the truth comes out, it's how justice is served. And then there's the reality of like being a modern day lawyer, particularly at a big law firm, where you are often working on behalf of like the highest paying clients. And often a lot of these firms too do have kind of like ideological leanings in one direction or the other and
mm,
devote their free time towards doing a particular kind of work. I think when it comes to that latter part, when it comes to like Jones Day leaning conservative, for instance, or WilmerHale leaning kind of democratic, a lot of that is seen by the people who work there as kind of like a side thing almost, like a little outside the normal like day-to-day business of being a lawyer, which is
mm.
much more like a company comes in and hires you to sue this case or defend them or help them with a merger or do whatever. And all that I think is regarded as pretty neutral. And it's kind of like on the fringes with pro bono stuff, with other things where the firms kind of provide a venue for the lawyers who work there to invest time in things that they care about.
So that's when it usually gets political.
Yeah, I mean, it's like hard to generalize too much, but yeah, it's not, it tends to not be in the day-to-day stuff, like the day-to-day
Right.
stuff is a lot more, it's,
Corporate law.
it's, by and large
Yeah.
big companies.
Because that's what you
Exactly.
make
Yeah.
money on, really.
Yeah, for sure. And so most of the firm's day-to-day business, in my experience, is taken up with stuff like that. My personal experience was a little unusual just because what I focused on at Wilmer was largely they have an anti-discrimination practice, and so I worked on a lot of like rights-based and constitutional law stuff, but that's a little unusual. By and large, it is like corporate stuff that takes up people's time at big law firms.
Interesting. So, one thing that I found to be really surprising when President Trump, made it known that he was going to go after the big law firms, right? Many of them reached out to him first to settle. And I kind of think it's one of the worst stereotypes about lawyers that they often settle first. Um, and Trump himself said he was surprised by his own success that law firms agreed to make deals with him on such shaky grounds. That says something, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if as I said to someone else, if Trump is surprised at his own success, you know that it's like it was really must have been weak ground because he is not a man who tends to be surprised at his own success.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it was really, really shocking, particularly because these law firms are just to like take a step back, the executive orders that he issued targeting them, from my standpoint, were just like terribly weak orders from a
Mm,
constitutional standpoint. So like these are cases that the law firms that if they fought, the ones that did choose to fight, they won. Like it was not a close case, you know?
mm,
And so it was particularly shocking to see these lawyers who were kind of supposed to be the biggest, fanciest lawyers in the world capitulate on something that they almost certainly could have won. And it's just weird because it really felt to me just like even stepping it back from the kind of politics of it, it felt like shooting yourself in the foot as a professional, you know, to be like, if you make your money being like, we are the best fighters in the world, we are the best at representing our clients, to then roll over on an easy fight the moment that, you know, it comes to you, it feels a little bit shocking, just as like a professional, from a professional standpoint.
yeah. But they do this a lot, though, lawyers. They tend to lean towards settling.
What are you thinking of in particular?
I don't know. It's just in my like I just from the stories that I've covered and my
Yeah,
experience, like I feel like the first people are more likely to just come to the table and say, okay. I mean, maybe I'm thinking of sexual
yeah.
harassment cases
Okay.
in particular.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's interesting. That's a very different context, I think. I mean, I think you are absolutely right. And what I'm trying to do is reconcile this with the stereotype in my head that lawyers will sue at the drop of a hat, which is also true to some
Right.
extent,
Yeah.
right? You know, and so I think lawyers are a complicated beast. They tend to be very litigious, but they also tend to use like litigation as a route to settlement, basically. So, you know, like,
Hmm.
whereas I think non-lawyers tend to think of suing as like always ending up in front of a jury where someone says who's right and who's wrong. With lawyers, it tends
Right.
to be a little bit more of a negotiation tactic.
Right.
And so I think that might be what's happening here, where these firms or some lawyers, like they just decided to try and cut out the middleman, as opposed to like fighting this and doing litigation that got halfway and then settling. Perhaps these firms were just like, you know, we're going to jump to the end point because we know how most litigation ends. We know that it settles. And so we're just going to settle with Trump right off the bat.
Right. You also have to think to yourself that they may be preoccupied with their shareholders or thinking about the fact that insurance companies might not be willing to carry them for very long, right?
For sure. I mean, I think they are definitely preoccupied with their profits for sure. Law
Mm.
firms don't have shareholders generally;
Oh,
they're
okay.
partnerships, so it's not set up quite the same way. But the principle of what you're saying is correct in that, like, these firms were absolutely concerned with their business. You know, they were concerned with like their profits, and it was really a moment where it was like you could see lawyers in real time choosing to prioritize business interests over kind of legal interests
Mm.
and that was what made it so interesting to me because it's this kind of conflict that you already alluded to that normally kind of goes along below the surface of the day-to-day lawyering, but this really brought it into the open and suddenly these lawyers took a stand, and what they took a stand on was not the thing that lawyers are supposed to, like, you know, they went the other way. They went towards business interests. They went towards kind of like protecting their income streams for the most part. And that was striking.
And that's not unlike the media and what we've seen in their settlements with President Trump. CBS, ABC.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I also think it's fascinating in terms of what the universities are doing too, though it's
Mhm.
obviously not like taken exactly the same route. But yeah, I think it's very possible. There was actually just a piece about this in the New Yorker like a couple days ago that what the big law firms did by capitulating was kind of set a standard, like a really unhelpful standard for other industries, basically, to you know, also roll over a little bit when this fight came to them. And because lawyers are supposed to be the standard bearer when it comes to fighting legal fights, basically, that's what they do, that it almost certainly had a kind of example setting effect.
What do these deals look like that they're making?
That's a great question, and nobody really knows. I mean,
Really?
yeah, I know. It's part of what's so fascinating is that, so for instance, they made these deals. They're incredibly vague. They generally involve a commitment to contribute a ton of pro bono, meaning free services from the firm
Mm,
to kind of favor causes of Trump.
like what?
But it's very vague, which is part of the problem. So like some of the firms claimed that it was just stuff they would have done anyway, but
Mm,
Trump was clearly did not see it that way and was like, no, they're going to help me negotiate trade deals. They're going to help me defend police officers accused of misconduct. A lot of kind of like PR dicey stuff that I imagine these firms would not want to get into. And just as an example of how incredibly ambiguous these are, there was there was congressional inquiry where they asked the firms to send them the contents of the deals, basically, because Congress was worried that it might be unconstitutional. And the firms responded in incredibly weird and unhelpful ways, like quite literally telling Congress to go look at Trump's tweet, for the full contents of the deal, which is
And what did the
not great.
tweet say again?
I don't remember exactly, but it was basically, it was a classic Trump media post where it was
Yeah.
kind of like,
Three
blah, blah.
lines. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It was definitely not what you think of as a legal deal. And another one said Congress should go look at an internal email that had been reposted in an industry trade magazine that was behind a paywall. So clearly the firms they didn't have a piece of paper somewhere that was like, here is exactly what we agreed to. And again, from the standpoint of being a lawyer, that's pretty bad lawyering to agree to something when you don't know what you're agreeing to.
Yeah, I was going to say, what lawyer would sign off on a document like that?
Yeah, if you know anything about lawyers, even more than they
They
like to
don't care about
swallow,
the
they like
fine
to,
print when it comes to the
they,
president. I mean, what?
yeah,
They're completely held hostage.
absolutely everything in writing. And for that not to be done here was just like really shocking from a professional standpoint.
Wow. Do you think this is a betrayal of legal ethics?
I do for sure. Yeah. I think, lawyers I think it's a betrayal of their job in several ways. Like in the legal ethics standpoint, for sure. Lawyers are supposed to uphold the rule of law in the country. And these attacks were a very direct attack on the rule of law, but arguably the most direct attack on the rule of law to date. And to kind of like roll over and capitulate to that without even a fight is a pretty big betrayal of what lawyers are supposed to stand for. I also think it's a pretty big betrayal of, lawyers being good at their job and what the function they're supposed to serve even to their clients, where we were talking before how if you're supposed to be an effective advocate for your clients, to like roll over in this way is I think kind of a betrayal of what lawyers are even supposed to be doing in a day-to-day sense.
Yeah. I'm sure it's a conflict of interest for the rest of their clients too. I mean, do they no longer represent people who are being targeted by Trump now?
So, it's a great question. In general, there's been stuff written about, and it seems like these attacks and the capitulation have had an effect similar to that, where it's harder to get representation if you're fighting against Trump. There's been some notable counterexamples. For instance, and this is the piece that I wrote a little while ago. There's been some notable counterexamples of small new firms and new things starting up explicitly to take up this fight that the big law firms would not. And so there's definitely representation is not gone, but of course, seeing big law firms capitulate in this way to the president has had a chilling effect on anybody else who is trying to get representation for, against the president.
I mean, you need like the firebrands like Abby Lowell who have already made their bones, right?
Yeah.
He's created his own firm. And just for context, Abby Lowell has really represented every major case in the past, modern political history, at least since I've been alive. I remember covering him in the John Edwards trial. John Edwards was acquitted. He worked for Jared Kushner and then went on to work for Hunter Biden. He's everywhere. And now he is representing Tish James. He's left his law firm to be able to do that. But I think that's a pretty stark example of a prominent lawyer leaving to create his own firm to take on the Trump administration. I know you wrote about some associates that left and law students who have boycotted in a way. They've said that, they're going to withhold their talents from these big law firms that are trying to recruit them. Has that been successful?
We'll find out. That's not going to be an overnight thing. The recruiting thing specifically happens on a very rigorous, year-to-year schedule. And so this will be something where we see the effects on these firms in years to come, basically. I think in terms of the reputation, it's already had an effect. As someone who went to law school and went through this process, reputation among these firms is kind of everything, law students view these firms as it's the start to your career. It's like getting into one of these firms is like a golden ticket sort of situation because it just sets you up in so many ways. And so you don't want to screw that up. You don't want to choose a firm whose reputation is going to work against you in the long run for sure. And so I suspect it is. I suspect it is sending more students away from the firms that capitulated, but it's going to be it'll be one of those things that'll be really interesting to track in the coming years, how these firms evolve, because I think this has changed their trajectory in some way.
And let's just talk a little bit about what they're resisting or giving up at one of these big law firms.
Yeah,
$250,000 a year starting salary. And you
I
could
think
go up
that's the latest. Yeah.
yeah, and you could go up to making as much as 6 million or more, right? And that's hard to say no to when you're leaving law school with up to $130,000 in debt, right?
Oh, for sure. It's wild. I mean, there is like part of what makes these law firms, these big law firms, such a like a crucible for all these difficult forces is that there's so much, it's so desirable to go there and there's so much pressure to go there in some ways,
Mm,
particularly going to law school, which is famously very expensive and like often leaves people with a lot of debt. When you're graduating that debt, it's hard to say no to an opportunity that promises to pay it off pretty quickly. And particularly when you're looking at an opportunity like big law as compared to if you wanted to go do something kind of purely, I don't know, like purely public interest oriented that was kind of less morally complicated, those jobs pay drastically, drastically less. And so, like, yeah, it takes a real conscious effort to turn away from this kind of opportunity.
yeah, no, it does. And that's why I wonder if it's real. I wonder if they'll really be able to do it
Yeah,
in
it's a
at the
good
end of the day.
question. I mean, I think there is serious doubt that it'll last, that this kind of like new resistance movement will last, so to speak. But I also think that's one of the reasons that it's worth talking about because I think sometimes with movements like this or things happening, like talking about it's like a matter of perception if people perceive it to be a real thing as opposed to kind of just like being a flash in the pan, which
Right.
is why I think it's like a story that is like
Should be
deep in
explored.
reach and is worth exactly because I
Yeah.
think like leaving it unexplored ensures that it won't happen.
It really depends on how the economy is as well and what kind of opportunities they have.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know. I am not an economist, and who the heck knows what's going to happen currently with the economy in the next
I
few
know.
years. But yeah,
Don't read 1929. Otherwise, you put all your money in your underwear drawer. Doug Emhoff, by the way, first gentleman, is still working for Willkie Farr, a major law firm that obviously settled with Trump. And there was a mass exodus at the firm, but it did not include Emhoff, who, is essentially working at a firm that's helping a man who may run again in 2028 when his wife wants to run, or as at least they both have hinted at the possibility that they both could run. And, has said some pretty horrible things about her and the party that she represents.
yeah. I mean, I think it just goes to show how complicated these big law firms are. You know, like
Mm,
there was definitely an exodus of some people, but those people were the outliers. Like the vast majority of people who worked at these places kept working there.
mm.
And I think it's because to leave is like a huge personal and professional risk. You know, it means putting your name out there into the public as someone who's willing to quit because of what you believe in, which is generally not a super hireable quality from, most companies and places.
Yeah.
It means giving up a lot of money.
Yeah. And then they're like, oh, you're dramatic. You're not going to go along with things, right?
Exactly. And although it's for the right reasons, like, I mean, just like real world, it's hard to get rid of that kind of like mark on you. It just means taking a lot of risk, particularly early in your career. I feel like there's a risk too for partners later in their career, but at least from my standpoint, it feels like they have some more power in this situation. But also, I would imagine, the people who are lawyer partners at big law firms are realists for the most part. I would be like a little bit surprised to like encounter a ton of really naive, pure-hearted idealists. And so it doesn't shock me that a lot of the partners stayed because they're just, I don't know.
And they have their lives now and their homes and their kids go to private schools and they spend time with I mean, they spend time with people who work in the administration and these are their lives living in.
And disrupting your life that majorly is a big thing. And I get it. And like I don't mean to judge them too harshly for it because I get leaving my law firm, which I did not do in protest. I liked working there a lot, but even like quitting a normal job for normal reasons is also already a big disruption to your life and
And to
takes a
become a
lot of,
journalist.
yeah, I
When
know.
I
And
told my parents I was going to be a journalist, they were like, "You are going to be a waitress for the rest of your life, just so you know."
yeah, I mean,
Thanks.
it, yeah, I mean, but parental approval is a tricky thing always, no matter what you
Right.
do, I
Yeah. They
feel.
would have been much happier if I went to law school, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, imagine how my parents were when I left the law job to go do other things, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's true.
But yeah, I mean, so leaving your job in the best of times is a difficult thing. Leaving your job under pressure, having to make a decision like that,
Yeah.
and like tell everyone you know, and not just tell everyone you know, but tell the whole world that this is what you believe and what you stand in. It's a big deal, you know.
And you don't really see the mass exoduses out of media companies either, really. And you're not really seeing them out of academia. It's very
No,
rare. People are keeping
yeah,
their jobs.
it's true. The lawyers, you're right, that's a really good point actually, and I hadn't thought about that. It's interesting because when I think of media training, I don't know. I was to say I'm not a journalist, but I am a journalist. But what I mean is like I didn't go to journalism school, so I was not
It
like
doesn't
trained
matter.
in.
You don't learn anything there anyway.
Okay,
Trust me. I would have been better off studying anything but communications.
well, I'm glad to know that I didn't. Good that I made the right decision there. But my point is that lawyers do have this particular worldview, particularly in their education, where you're trained that like not just in how to do your job, but like there is a moral aspect to your profession.
Right.
Like
We
it
have
is
that
your
too,
job.
though. We have moral
Yeah,
codes. Yeah. Keep going, though.
yeah. No, I mean that's why. Just so just to talk about the like the lawyer side, like where it's like you are a representative of democracy. Like you are as a.
So are we, though, as journalists. We're representatives of defenders of democracy, too.
No, you're right. And now I'm like, as we're talking it out, I'm like, I was trying to come up with like a reason
We
why
don't sign
lawyers
any
would
oaths, though, but do you sign an oath as a lawyer?
when you become a member of the bar, you generally have to take an oath of office, it's called, and it's in
Okay.
front of a court, and it does say things like, I promise to uphold the law and like administrate justice and do a lot of the things that arguably lawyers don't do all the time. So there's like a pretty high level of intensity around like, you are a representative of the U.S. democracy at its finest. And so perhaps that is like why some of these young lawyers especially left. But you're right, like journalists are trained to like a really high standard of ethical conduct too. And so it's surprising. I mean, not surprising, but it is curious that there's this particular exodus of lawyers, and it's not clear that there's been a similar exodus in these other industries.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's funny. You have attorney-client privilege. We have off the record that binds us. It's obviously different. I think yours is illegal, where you can actually be sued. If we break off the record, there's no suing. It's just our reputations, and we lose our sources, right? So
It's
it's
true.
different.
There's a lot of similarity. The more that we talk about it, the more I'm like, wow, there's a lot of similarities. And I found this already in writing for just like writing news pieces and going through fact checking and stuff. The first time I went through like a really intensive fact checking process with like multiple layers of fact checking for a news piece I was publishing, I was like, oh, this is so easy. I did this all the time as a lawyer. Like that kind of like intensive
Yeah.
level of making sure things are right and citing everything is like deeply familiar to me as a lawyer. They're very compatible professions in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I could tell from your writing in your piece in the New Republic, which everyone should check out. It is called, hold on one second. Let me get it. The lawyers who gave up big money to fight Trump. Not that many of them. Teaser. What does that say about the times? But tell me what these new firms look like anyway.
Yeah. So interestingly, after all the stuff we talked about, after all the like big law firms capitulating, there was this little I don't know, creation of several new little organizations or like wings of existing organizations that are expressly devoted to kind of defending the rule of law. And so, for instance, one of them is Lowell and Associates, who we were just talking about, and he scooped up two of the associates who quit from Skadden in protest, which is a big law firm that capitulated, and has made a name for themselves kind of representing like high profile public figures who were either, Trump tried to fire, or in other ways were like fighting for the kind of integrity of their jobs, like Lisa Cook of the Federal Reserve Board.
Right.
And so they like,
Who's being investigated for mortgage fraud, right?
yes, I believe that is the case, though I mean, like, I am sure her representation, and as it seems to the outside, it is primarily a politically motivated,
Right.
matter. Yeah. And so that's one. The Washington Litigation Group is another one, which is like brand new and is representing similar kinds of cases. But basically, there's like been a couple of new little startups, I guess is the right word, that are really taking on this fight that the big law firms would not, and like fighting for specifically for the rule of law for like cases where it feels like the power of the executive office is abusing the legal system for political ends, basically.
Yeah. So is there any good that can come out of all of this?
I mean, what I'm talking about feels like a weird, good silver lining. I mean,
But
as we were talking,
will it continue though after a Trump administration if Democrats are in office?
I don't know. I mean, look, I barely knew what Trump was going to do last week, let alone what's going to happen in the next 3 years. So predicting what happens after Democrats get back in office is like beyond my current predictive
Right,
abilities.
right.
But I will say that generally law firms don't go away or even pop up overnight. So that's why this is so striking is because so
Mm,
many of these new ones were created. But lawyers and law firms are not like it's not a really agile industry. You know, it's not like startups or tech or
mm.
something where there's like new companies being born and going away every 2 seconds. Like they're slow to move. And so I kind of expect that if these firms continue to pick up these fights, they're going to keep hiring people, they're going to be around, and then they're going to be big enough that they're not going to just go away overnight if in several years a Democrat ends up in the executive office. So I think it probably is not like a watershed change in the way that the whole industry operates, but I think it is like a little bit of a new thing that's going to stick around.
I mean, let's be serious. You've already heard Abby Lowell say that Attorney General Bondi has carried out Trump's wrongdoing more than any attorney general since John Mitchell with President Nixon. So I've got to think that these firms might be also investigating Trump administration officials after his term, much like he is doing to Biden and Obama administration officials, right?
You mean that a future Democratic president would hire them to help investigate
Yeah.
stuff? I disagree. I don't think they'll be doing that. I think they
Okay.
are like, I think doing an affirmative investigation of someone like that is a very different matter from representing someone defensively in a legal action. And I
Mm,
think that these firms are, it's just like a different competency. So, like, let alone that setting aside the politics of it, they're not set up to do that kind of thing.
right. I mean, maybe they would be retained by the president if that was what they wanted to do.
Maybe, though, again, it's like a different world of legal stuff. I mean, maybe I'll eat my words. Maybe everybody will just be the same in another 3 years. But I kind of suspect that these firms are not going to serve that particular function in 3 years. I think they are
Maybe
like,
they'll be defending Pam Bondi.
I think unlikely, but again, who knows? We'll find out.
Right.
I do think like these firms specifically on their site, they say, you know, we are devoted to defending the rule of law. And to at least lawyers, at least to me right now, that
Mm,
means something and they're signaling a particular thing. And that doesn't just mean going after Republicans. It means defending the integrity of the system as a whole. And so perhaps they'll all change. Like certainly politics seems to influence absolutely everything. But I would be surprised because it would really sacrifice these specific lawyers' reputations. And they seem to have
mm,
hired a lot of zealots, you know, a lot of people who are
right.
like zealous about the rule of law. And so they would be throwing their own careers on a fire to do that.
They could also create a podcast company on top of all of that, I'm sure.
Oh, that totally. I think, to be honest, I think more lawyers should like invest in talking to the public. I think there's a real dearth of understanding among
Mm.
people as to how the law works. So I'm all for that. If they want to create podcast companies, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, it could help their reputations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Matthew. I'm gonna have to wrap it up because I think my dog is having a panic attack.
Oh, I'm so
Um,
sorry.
and I'm not going to drug her as other friends of mine drug their dogs. I apparently everyone's dog's on Xanax now. She has an anxiety little belt on her, but no, I don't
Oh,
know. This
well, yeah,
isn't.
by all means, go soothe your anxious dog. I do not want to be the source of more anxiety for
No, no, no.
Panchetta. Yeah.
Yeah, pancetta. She's off the charts. But this was a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I hope everybody who is listening feels like they know more about possibly a movement afoot of law of really future ace lawyers and current associates and lawyers who are giving up money to fight Trump. I mean, it says something. You're not seeing it in other industries, so Something to
No,
take note
and
of.
yeah, I mean, it was a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me. And I will say, if anybody, like, just to plug myself too, if anybody would like to know more about legal stuff in particular, feel free to join me on my Substack too, which is called Should You Care? And specifically, my purview is kind of talking about explaining legal stuff for non-lawyers, which I feel like is a pretty needed thing these days. So
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. Check
thank
out his
you.
Substack, Should You Care? And I should note that there are a lot of journalists who have left their companies because of, clashes in terms of editorial content, but usually it's the company that pushes them out, right? It's not always that they go out on their own. Obviously, I started my own company with my own independent vision. It wasn't necessarily because of an editorial clash, but because I have a different view. And it's not necessarily because I'm thinking, oh, well, this is designed to go after Trump specifically. This is independent media, investigative media. But it is happening, but it does feel like it's a little bit more of the people who are not fitting in with the culture are being pushed out with a wave of new shareholders and leaders that care more about surviving in a Trump administration. So it is, in some ways it's similar.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, the more we talked about that before, the more I was convinced that the two professions are very similar in a lot of ways. But I
Yeah.
agree, it doesn't feel like with lawyers, perhaps I'm just more aware of it because I am a lawyer, but it feels a little bit like there's momentum in this direction.
Right.
I'm not sure if in journalism it feels like there's momentum in that direction
Right.
of like leaving organizations. So I think that's maybe where it feels a little different for me.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you
should
too.
catch up again soon when there's any update.
Yeah, sounds great.
That was another episode of the Tara Palmeri Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, share this with your friends. I would love to hear what you think about this episode. Very thought provoking. And it really makes me think too about the media and why so few have really stood up as well. I want to invite you to support my independent journalism. I am not controlled by shareholders or corporate boards who are in compliance with Trump and want to have a good relationship with the White House. So you can go to tarapalmeri.com. That's TARAPALMERI.com to support that. I write whatever I know and know to be the truth. Thanks to my sourcing and relentless investigative journalism, you can support that by joining the Red Letter. It is a community that I am building based on trust. And yeah, please become a subscriber. It's a way to get my exclusive reporting straight to your inbox as well. I want to thank my producer, Eric Abenate. I want to thank Abby Baker, who does the research and social media. And I want to thank Adam Stewart, who handles my graphics. I will see you again tomorrow.